Okay, in today's lecture we're going to look at this book. This is a little bit more difficult book, but it's also quite interesting, and I think we can get some interesting things here. I'm going to start out in part 1, and I'm going to go through a little bit of this chapter 1, even though of course we've done a lot of it, but there's some interesting parts here that I thought would be fun to look at. By the way, one thing before we start here, a student was having some trouble in our last project where we were using array.sort, and they were getting an underline under the word array and it wouldn't compile, and they couldn't get it to run, and we couldn't figure out why that was. And the student did some Googling and found out that they had actually named their project array, and I think we had given it a slightly different name, but we didn't use the word array exactly. But they had just named the project array, and that somehow was confusing the compiler, and so it had to do with issues of what they call namespace. But anyway, so we have to be careful of things like that. Okay, now let's continue. So here he's talking about the IDE, in other words, Visual Studio. And this is just interesting. We didn't go into that much detail about it. He says that, of course, there's the welcome part, and you click on the welcome tab to see a series of links that provide the developer assistance for using Visual Studio. So this is 2012 version. In this book that we're going through now, they're using 2010. But so here we have a start page. I guess it's like the welcome page. Here's the welcome, and I guess we could click on latest news, and you can get RSS feed there. Go back to here. There's some information here. Looks like they have some tutorials here that we didn't look at. Learn to build WPF applications. Well, we didn't study that yet, but learn here to build Windows Form applications. And so they have this information here. And I guess there may be some kinds of tutorials even here, I'm not sure. But you could check it out. Like here, creating a new Windows form, creating event handlers in Windows Forms, adjusting the size and scale of Windows Forms, changing. So this might be interesting to take a look at, especially now that you basically understand this material. Now I don't see this particular link there, and I don't see this, but I guess it's in 2010. So here he says you'll find a list of topics related to web application development. Now we're not doing web application development, but it's somewhat similar to what we are doing. And there's also Cloud, Office, and SharePoint, so you can develop applications for the cloud, even for Microsoft Office, and for SharePoint. There's also, if you want to work with a database driven application, you can do that as well. And of course we have our recent projects. They also tell you can move the different windows around, so I can move this around, and one way to do that is just to click here and move it around, and you get this thing. Maybe it looks a little different in 2010 or 2008, but it should be there. And then you can choose the spot where you want it to go, and it'll go there. Now another thing that they mention here is when you have a form, if you change the name of the control after you have inserted some code in an event handler, the name of the event handler, the event handled by the subroutine, will automatically be changed. The name of the subroutine, however, won't be. In other words, here, suppose I have a button and I double click it and I add some code to it. Now it doesn't like that. So I had to change it to this. Let me just show you. Okay, it doesn't like this, so I check. Look, what does it say? It gives me a little clue. It says Windows Application 3, that's I guess the name of this application, .form1 cannot refer to itself through its default instance. Use me instead. So that means that since I'm in Form 1, I shouldn't refer to Form 1. I should call it me. So that's the word that you should use, or the keyword that you should use. And hopefully that will make it okay. So now it's okay. Okay, so me means the form and the for-color property, and change the color property to azure, whatever that is. So anyway, if I have this code, let's just see what happens. Let's see what happens. Not what I expected. Okay, well I wanted the background color actually. So I change it to background color, and then let's check that. So it changes it to that. Okay, so suppose I have code like this. And then suppose I want to change the name of button 1. So I'm going to change it from button 1 to something else. Maybe I'll call this button color changer. The name of it, not the text value. I can change the text value also. But suppose I change the name of the button. So the button, and I find the name property. Always hard to find that. Here. So suppose I change this name to color changer or something like that. Okay, so what happens to my code? So this didn't change. The name of the click handler didn't change. But that's not really where, that's not, that doesn't tell this code when to respond and when not to. So the fact that this is called button 1 doesn't say whenever button 1 is clicked, this should respond. The thing that tells it to respond whenever our button is clicked is here. After the word handles, this thing. So it responds whenever this thing is clicked. So now this thing is called, now this says color changer because I changed the name. So this part got changed. Maybe I should have shown you that before. Let me go back and call it button 1 again, and then look at this again. Well, let's go back here and change it to button 1. Or whatever. I guess it should be capital, but it'll still show us what we want to see. So now it says it handles button 1.click. So this part changes when I change the name. This doesn't change. This stays the same. Okay? But this is the part anyway that, or actually this is the part anyway that says when to respond. It responds when what? When button 1.click event occurs. So it handles that event. Okay, so they make that statement in the text. Okay, let's examine this code here, a very simple code. It's in a button 1, and dim language as string, so we declare a string variable, read it from the text box, and then we have an if statement. If the language equals something, then we say something. Otherwise, we say something else. So, okay, that's easy code. They say that the code in this first application isn't very robust. That means like it can't handle a lot of different conditions or situations. If the user doesn't enter the string with the exact spelling in the listing, so if it doesn't enter exactly this exact spelling, so if they don't use a capital V here and a capital B here and so on, the comparison will fail. So we won't know. We won't say that language equals what we were hoping it was. You can convert the string to uppercase and then compare it with this text by doing the following. After you read in the text into the language variable, then right here type language dot to uppercase, and then it will make this uppercase. Rather, it will make the entire what was read in uppercase. So in other words, replace just language with language to upper. And to upper is a method associated with the string class. And remember that language was defined to be a string, right? So since it's a string, and a string is actually an object, we're going to mention this more clearly a little bit later, but variables are also objects, and objects, that means that objects have properties, and they also have, or we sometimes call them fields, sometimes we call them properties, and they also have methods associated with them. Different objects will have different methods, but string objects have a method called toUpper. Now again, why is this? You might complain, but wait, if it's a method, it should have parentheses here. But I explained this before. I said that if you don't, that Visual Basic allows you not to put the parentheses there if you don't want to. If it's not going to be taking an argument or a parameter, and it's not here, so they don't use the parentheses. So now, I guess toUpper, I think it makes the whole thing uppercase. So if that's true, then we'd want to change this whole thing to uppercase Visual Basic, and then whatever the user typed in here would get converted to uppercase, and then it would match this as uppercase. So that would be a little bit more robust. Now he says maybe it's even better to try to limit the responses that the user can give. So instead of giving them a text box, maybe give them a list box or some other multiple choice box to choose from. Okay? So that way they don't do any typing, they just select something. So then you have more control over what they're putting in, and that's safer because that's, for one thing, they can't put in some kind of virus or some kind of code that would create a problem, and also they can't make mistakes in terms of what they're entering. So if you give them just a list box to choose from, that kind of makes it easier for them to respond and also safer for you as the programmer. They say here you could use a combo box also. So maybe something like this, a combo box here. You could try that. Okay, the next section is understanding the IDE components. That means like the different menus in the IDE. And that means these things up here, all these different things up here. But we've done a lot of them already. You could try to explore them some more. We're not going to go through this whole text, so I'm not going to go through all of that. This is a kind of cool one though. Under the Edit menu, there's something called Outlining submenu. So under Edit, there's Outlining, and so he says a practical application contains a substantial amount of code in a large number of event handlers and custom procedures, subroutines, and functions. So you have event handlers, you probably have a lot of them in a big application, and or a real application, and you'll also have subroutines that you've written or functions. To simplify the management of the code window, so we have all this code in the code window, the Outlining submenu contains commands that collapse and expand the various procedures. Let's say you're finished editing the click event handlers of several buttons on the form. You can reduce these event handlers to a single line that shows the names of the procedures with a plus sign in front of them. You can expand the procedures listing at any time by clicking the plus sign. When you do so, a minus sign appears in front. Okay. So let's see. For example, here we have just, I only have this one thing, this one button here, but you might have many buttons. But let's try collapse to definitions. So let's see what that does. Okay, so I can't see the code inside here. I just have the name of the button click event handler here. Okay, and we might have many, then we would have just the names of them. And then here's this little plus that they were talking about, and you can see it again. You can toggle it like that. And I guess you can do other things also. Stop outlining, collapse to definitions, toggle all outlining, and so on. Okay, so that could be nice to use sometimes. Okay, let's look at the build menu. The build menu contains commands for building, compiling your project. The two basic commands in the build menu are build and rebuild all. The build command compiles, that is, builds the executable for the entire solution, but it doesn't compile any components of the project that haven't changed since the last build. So if something hasn't changed, it won't recompile it. The rebuild command clears any existing files, that is, any existing executable files, and builds the solution from scratch. Every time you start your application, Visual Studio recompiles it as needed, so you usually don't have to build your application to execute it. There are situations, however, when you add custom classes and controls to your application when you must build the project. So we haven't been building. Okay, and then the debug menu. This menu contains commands to start or end an application, as well as the basic debugging tools. So we've used some of that so far. The data menu. This menu contains commands you will use with projects that access data. You'll see how to use this short menus commands in discussion with visual database tools. So like if you're using a remote database, you might need the data menu items. Okay, they also mentioned the toolbox window, which we've used a lot, and the solution explorer window, which is the window on the right here. This one over here, well, it's not there now, is it? I think I have to go to view, solution explorer, where is it? Here. Okay, there it is. Got in the way of my other one though. So I just dragged it down by doing this and putting it here. It's a little bit too low though. So anyway, this is the Solution Explorer window, right? The Solution Explorer window contains a list of the items in the current solution. A solution can contain multiple projects, and each project can contain multiple items. The Solution Explorer displays a hierarchical list of the components organized by project. You can right-click on any component of the project and choose Properties in the context menu to see the selected component's properties in the Properties window. So I guess they just mean here, you can right-click here, go to Properties, and you can see the properties for form1.vb. If the solution contains multiple projects, you can right-click the project you want to become the startup form and select Set as Startup, but we don't have that. We're not doing multiple projects. You can also add items to a project with the Add Item. Okay, so we're not doing that. Okay, anyway. Then we have the Properties window, which we've seen. And the Output window is this window down here. Output. And if it's not there, you can always go to View. Actually, is it here? Yeah, you can go to View Output. The output window is where many of the tools, including the compiler, send their output. Every time you start an application, a series of messages is displayed in the output window. These messages are generated by the compiler, and you need not understand them at this point. If the output window is not visible, you can make it visible. Okay, now in this text they use these windows also, the command and immediate windows. We haven't used those yet. So they say that when you're testing a program, you can interrupt its execution by inserting a breakpoint. Now I don't think we've done that yet either, but you could do this. You could put a breakpoint before, so I just click that once and it puts a little dot there. And what's going to happen is when I execute this code, which means when I click the button, it's going to start running, but when it gets to this point, which actually there's only one line here. Let's say I had a couple lines. Let's say copy this here, and maybe I make the different color. Of course, this is silly to do this, but okay, whatever. Another color here. Okay, so I had that line, and then maybe I'll have a message box. Something like this. Okay, so anyway, you put a break here. So what's going to happen is it's going to, or let's put it here instead. So it's going to stop after this line of code is run. It's going to stop. So let's see what happens. Let's try it. So I click, and it stopped. So I guess that form has changed, but we can't see it since it stopped. It doesn't actually allow us to see the form anymore. But I guess the color has changed to blue because this line has already been run. But now this line hasn't been run yet, by the way. So if you put a breakpoint here, it stops before it completes this line. It doesn't complete this line and then stop. Okay? So anyway, this line hasn't been run yet. So they said, while testing a program, you can interrupt its execution by inserting a breakpoint. When the breakpoint is reached, the program's execution is suspended, and you can execute a statement in the immediate window. Any statement that appears in your VB code can also be executed in the immediate window. Okay? So here's the code. And then I just put this line in here. Now this is basically just allows me to get access to the log function. You know, we have the log function in mathematics, and this is a way to access the log function. So I suppose I wanted to put some other code in here, like I wanted to put this actual code in my program, and I wanted to test it first and see what it's going to do. So maybe I was going to put it after this line or something, but I want to test it before I actually do that. So you can do that down here. What you do is you put a question mark first, and then you put the code that you want to test. And then you hit enter, and this is what I get. So this means that the log of 35 is equal to this. Or I could do another example. So let's see. Let me stop this. Stop the code. So even though it's in the middle, and there's a breakpoint, so it's just still running, but it's stopped. It's still running. I have to stop the code first. Stop the running of it, and then let me add in a few more lines here. Suppose I add in these two lines. So I create a double called result, and then I assign that result to this number. Okay. This is just the log of 35. Okay, and then let's run it again. Click the button, because this code is within the button. And now suppose I put in how do I do that? I don't know how to do that exactly, but I guess you just put the insertion bar here and then hit backspace. And then now I can paste in what I want, which is this. Okay, so this is what I want to test this statement, suppose. So before I actually put that statement in here somewhere, I want to test it in the immediate window. So I put a question mark, and then I put this statement which says what? It's a string. The answer is here, is a string, and then concatenation, and then result, which has already been assigned up here to this number here, and then I use the toString method of result. Now remember, again, we are saying that result must be a kind of an object in order to have a method. This is a method. The toString methods are associated with objects. They don't just occur by themselves, like alone by themselves. They're basically, they have to be associated with an object. The toString method here is associated with this object. Now I know we haven't studied objects, so that may not be clear, but methods have to be associated with objects, and here this method is associated with this object, and this object has the value up here, this number, and then we're calling the toString method of the object means we're going to convert it to a string. I hope that's clear. Okay, anyway, let's try it. See what happens. Of course you know what's going to happen. It's going to do that. Okay, so this is a way to test your code down here. And I think this will always show up if you put a breakpoint in. It will show up. And I think it only shows up, you can only see it when you're in the middle of a program, because you can't really use it unless you're in the middle of a program anyway. But I think it will always show up. Like if you put a breakpoint somewhere and run the program and it stops and it's in the middle of the program, you should see the immediate window, and also this other window which we haven't talked about called the locals window, which I think gives you the values of the different variables in your program. Now we have I guess not just a variable, yeah, I guess this is a variable me, maybe standing for an object. Anyway, result is a variable, and sender, well, we didn't talk about that, but result is a variable. It has this value, and it gives you the type and so on. So this tells you at this point in the program what are the values of the different variables. Remember, result might change later in the program. Maybe I have a long program, and down below here somewhere result might change its value, but at this point in the program result is equal to this. So that can also be useful when you're trying to find errors or trying to figure out what's going on in your program, or generally just debugging your program. Okay, now here's something else that you can do if you're trying to debug. They say you can, I think this works, you can also send output to this window from within your code. So you can actually put something in your code, and you should see the result in the immediate window. And the way that you do that is you do this. You use something like this: debug right line or debug right. So actually for example, here you put this code in your code and now this, we don't necessarily understand this, but what this does is this is a function called dateDiff, and it will take this argument. Anyway, what it does is it calculates the number of days between this and this date. It's the number of days. So basically so all of this just calculates the number of days, which is like 443 days, okay, between these two dates. So if we put this in the debug right line, and we put that in our code, it's going to write that result. In other words, it's going to write this number 433 to the immediate window. Okay, so you don't have to, you can get it to write. So let's see. So we have, here's our code. We click, well, I'm sorry, here's the code. So I had this already, I already did that. But here, I put this in here. I just copied that code and put it in here. So it's supposed to write that number 433 into our immediate window, which you can see already did. But let's go back to the code and watch it do it again. So I click here, and it breaks before it gets to that. Before it gets to this line, it's already this program has stopped. So I press continue, and now it ran this line of code and stopped here, and you can see it wrote 433 to the immediate window. So I can use this debug.write line to write stuff to the immediate window, and then I can see what's going on in the code. Now, we've been using other methods. For example, we've been generating stuff in the message box so that we know what's going on. Or we might, well, that's basically what we've been doing. We've been generating output to the message box so we can see sometimes what's going on. But you could do it this way. And in this text, they do it this way repeatedly. Now, this hasn't stopped running yet, so I have to continue. The button click procedure hasn't finished yet, so I have to continue. So I can continue by clicking here, and then it finishes, and so this gets generated. And the color is actually coral, like we expected, because we ran through this code. Okay? Now they say another way you can do this is you can, instead of inserting those break symbols there, you can write the word stop, and that should do the same thing. So I could put the word and take the breaks out and put the word stop in, and then I run it, and it's going to stop here before it gets to write this line. So let's try it. So I click the button to generate this to run this code. It goes to stop in there, it stops there. So I guess stops there. And I have 3 of these written, but when I press continue, I'm going to have 4 because this is going to run. Okay? And then this comes up, finishes. Okay? So they say the immediate window is available only when the application's execution is suspended. To continue experimenting with it, click the button on the form to evaluate your choice. When the stop is executed again, you'll be switched to the immediate window. Okay, now he also mentioned something called the command window. Is available at design time. The command window allows you to access all the commands of Visual Studio by typing their names in this window. Now, I can't find this on my version of Visual Studio. Maybe it's because it's the free version, or it's a new version, I'm not sure. Because here I went to the help. It's called the command window. It says that you can go to the view menu and then choose other windows, but I did that. Here, the view menu and other windows, but I don't see the command menu here. So anyway, or the command window. But it sounds interesting. The command window is available at design time. So not just when you're running, but also when you're designing. And basically, I think what it lets you do is you can run any of these things, anything here, by typing in the command. Instead of having to point and click and do them, you can type them in. By typing their names in this window. If you enter the string edit followed by a period, you will see a list of all the commands of the edit menu. So that sounds kind of good. So you could type somewhere in the command menu, you would type edit, and you'd see all of these different options here. Including the ones that are not visible at the time, and you can invoke any of these arguments and commands and pass arguments to them. For example, if you enter edit.find margin, so that's like accessing the find command, right? You know, you have edit and find and replace or find, and you can find something in your text, and you can do this within the command menu. That could be useful. Find margin. Enter the first instance that you will be located. Okay, anyway, if you can find that, please let me know. Okay, there's also an error list window. The window is populated by the compiler with error messages if the code can't be successfully compiled. You can double-click on an error message in this window, and the IDE will take you to the line with the statement in error, which you should fix. Change the message box function. So if we had, let's try it. So here's the error. You go to View and Error List, so you get it here. And if we change this to something misspelled, then here, it shows up here. And they say that if you double click on it, it'll take you to the error. Okay, and then you can go to the setting the environment option, so you can change the font color, I guess, or the size of the font in your IDE by doing this. You open the Tools menu and select the options, and you get this. You can change the fonts and the colors and so on. It says by default Visual Studio saves the changes to the current project every time you press F5. You can change this behavior by setting. You can change that. And there's lots of options apparently in this here. So lots of things you can do. Okay, we'll come back to this in the next video using code snippets. This is kind of fun. I think you'll like that.